know the online Stalinists won't dig this episode, but one thing I love is punk and metal music. I've had the opportunity to play and record it all over the place. And if you've read the best-selling pamphlet on everyday analysis, I was a teenage anarchist, then you also know I'm intrigued about the history of punk. And punk's history in the USSR is a complex story of a true underground movement at odds with state repression. Unlike its American counterpart, Soviet punk didn't have a definitive sound. There wasn't a music industry or a media apparatus to tell young aspiring counterculturists what was good and what punk is supposed to look like. There was no tape trading scene helped by physical media magazines like you had in the West. In the Soviet scene, people learned how to press vinyl on X-rays. We'll talk about that in the show as well. That's really interesting. We're also going to talk about the documentary film that my good friend and TIR cousin, if you will, Alexander's like a TIR cousin, has completed, discussing what happened to the punk scene with the Russians that have fled since the Ukraine war. So please welcome TIR cousin, Alexander Herbert.
You call me Unk. You call me TIR Unk.
Unk, you're Unk.
I was watching a video last night. It was like a comedy one where someone called like a dude Unk, and he was like, "Wait a minute, how old do you think I am?" And the kid was like 35, and he's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "That means you Unk." Yeah. Thanks for having me on. Sorry to divert here.
No. This is actually a really interesting topic. I don't think people know too much about this scene, because I think when we think about music, we think that it's just everywhere, and we forget that there is this thing called the Iron Curtain. And how did punk even infiltrate this Iron Curtain? And what did the Soviet Cultural Commission have against it?
Yeah, I think this is a cool opportunity to talk kind of informally about this. So because I wrote this book, we can argue about the cover photo some other day, but I wrote this book. It's published by Microcosm. It came out in 2019, and when it came out, I did a book talk tour in Canada, Eastern Canada, and the Eastern United States, and I had the West Coast tour planned. I was flying to Seattle, renting a car, driving all the way down to Las Vegas to talk about it. I had all the venues booked, and then COVID happened, and I had to cancel everything. So it didn't end up happening. I never had the opportunity to talk about the book on the West Coast. So I mean, this kind of fills in for it. But this is a cool opportunity. I haven't talked about this topic or the book in a while, but I talked about it so much and so frequently that it's fresh in my mind. And
I mean, it's what's interesting to me is especially from the U.S. context. Like, I wrote my little pamphlet. I was a teenage anarchist, and I started with the American context of hardcore, which is, in my opinion, a derivative off of what young Americans are seeing out of the United Kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
So what I've heard, and it's hard to even hear this music because it wasn't necessarily legal. Like, it was super underground. Like, we think stuff is underground here. It's like, no, it was really underground. So how does it even infiltrate so people can even hear it? Because there's nothing like it in the Soviet Union at this time. We have no internet at this time, and there is a massive divide culturally, to say the least, between the capitalist West and the USSR. So how are young people even hearing anything like this, or able to hear it?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it lands us in chapter 1 in my book, which is about the beginning of punk in the Soviet Union, which occurs in Leningrad / St. Petersburg, whatever. And if you know the map of the Soviet Union, you know that St. Petersburg / Leningrad at the time is considered Russia's window to the West. It's on the Baltic Sea. but that also means that it's the closest to the western border of the Soviet Union. It's very close to the Baltic states, which have more easy access to the West. And it also means that it's easier to intercept radio transmissions in St. Petersburg than it would be in Moscow or anywhere in the Far East. So the book begins with this character. His name is Svin. Andrei Panov is his name. And I sort of consider him to be the progenitor of punk in the Soviet Union. And a lot of people, most of the people that I interviewed from this period were willing to admit that, yeah, Andrei / Svin, we'll call him Svin from now on, which means pig. He was the first guy. And the reason that he was able to do it is there are two ways. The first one is that his family was what you could consider a Soviet cultural bourgeois, I guess. His father lived in Israel, and his mother was a ballet dancer, I
Oh,
think,
wow.
dancer or instructor. And so they had some money. The father would send money home once in a while, but that also meant that Andrei was not very liked in school. People considered they considered him and his family to be traitors because his dad had immigrated to Israel. But he still had money, and he had a good sound system, and he could go to black markets in Leningrad, which, as I said, because it's closest to the border, people could kind of smuggle in records, or they could smuggle in any other kind of recordings. And through those black markets, he could find some things. And one thing that he found after 1977, I think 1978, was a Sex Pistols record. I'm not clear which one. I don't know if it was
They
Never
only have
Mind
one.
Bullets, and I don't know if it was one of the demos, but it was what he found, right? And the way that, because he died in the 90s, the way that the people around him understood was that, these kids would go to the black market and they would look for the coolest covers. Not like cover songs, but like the coolest looking artwork on the records.
I mean, is that any different? I don't know if you're old enough to remember record stores, but is that any different than us?
I still got record stores today, and I still do that. I go to record stores and I look at who's got the most original artwork. Sometimes you're upset. Sometimes you get the most original artwork and you listen to it and you're like, oh,
Trash.
this is shit. Yeah.
Yes.
But
Oh, dude, I won't get into it now, but yeah. Yeah, but that's interesting. They're just trying to find artwork in the black market. So I'm assuming they're paying, if they have the money, way more for these smuggled imports, right?
yeah. And that's why it takes Sven, like I said, from a very particular socioeconomic background to be able to buy these things, bring them home, and then gradually he, invites friends over to his house to start listening to the records. And then one of his friends, this individual, Yevgeny Ufit, who some people might know as the progenitor of a film genre called necrorealism. Yevgeny Ufit is friends with Sven, and he listens to the Sex Pistols and stuff, and he says, these guys, you can do what these guys are doing. Like, they don't know how to play anything, right? And so Sven takes that serious. He's like, yeah, you're right. I can pick up a bass or something like that and just start jamming. And so he does, and he invites his friends over, and they start a band. They call it Автоматически удовлетворительный, which means the automatic satisfiers, which is a play on the name the Sex Pistols.
Oh, interesting. And,
Yeah.
and and there's another thing that I saw. There's a cool little documentary series. I think it's called like Bandsplaining or something.
Mhm.
And they talk about this in two parts. And one of the things they said was that as the late 60s and 70s were rolling around and rock music was slowly starting to infiltrate as well, um, there was like approved bands that had to sing these messages, but those bands were allowed to have like electric instruments. So electric instruments are flowing in as well.
Yeah, I'll get to the
Okay.
approved bands because Sven kind of kicks off this process in Leningrad, and Victor Tsoi, who you have pictured in the
Hmm.
thing, he's one of these guys. He's friends with Sven, and he's actually his first band is Автоматически удовлетворительный. He plays bass for them. But then he goes off and he does his own thing. But there's also people that are amassing around these proto musicians that are around Svin, that are listening to his records and enjoying them. And another one of these individuals is this character Fyodor Lavrov, Fedi Lavrov. And Fedi, he's considered the first anarcho-punk of the Soviet Union.
Okay.
He's younger than the rest of the guys, and so he's kind of like the outcast of them. And he decides, I'm gonna go and record my own stuff. So he ends up by the 80s, the early 80s, writing his own music as well that is more explicitly political. But the youth in Leningrad, there's obviously an interest in rock music that is emerging, that the authorities figure better to control this than to let it kind of devolve into illegal activity, right? If we could get a handle of it, if we can control the distribution, the access to it, then that's better for us. And so the authorities in Leningrad, they approve of an institution called the Leningrad Rock Club. This is in 1980, I believe, is when they prove it. And they put at the helm of the rock club, of course, it's staffed by KGB members, for one. But
Interesting.
it's also staffed by established rock personalities. So anybody who knows Russian or Soviet rock music, you might have heard the band Akvarium. Boris Grebeshnikov, he's the singer. He's this kind of like Tom Petty of the Soviet Union, right? He's put on the board of members that have to approve bands that are emitted into the rock club. The rock club serves as a sort of union, I guess, for Leningrad rockers. And at first, Svin and company are absolutely denied access to the rock club because punk music is just, they don't know how to play, they're unprofessional. And another thing that they were required to do is, in order to get access to play in the rock club, you had to submit your lyrics. The lyrics were read by a board of about 5 members. Again, 3 of which, maybe 4 or all 5, are working for the KGB at the same time. And that's their way of policing what gets public access. So Svin and them are not allowed in the rock club at first. Most of Svin's lyrics are about living a dirty life and smelling bad, and you can look up videos of him where he's got his pants half down when he's on stage and stuff like that. It's very like Sex Pistols-esque, right? It's all parroting that. Fedi, at the same time, he's younger. Remember, he applies to work to go in the rock club, and they say, you're too young, you're too new, you should go, keep practicing, apply again, and come back. So, if anybody told that to you or me when we were 15, we would have said, fuck you. I'm never coming back here. You got
That's exactly what I would say. I still say that to this day.
Fedi gets that rejection. He goes and he gets his friends and he records his own music under the name Hotel Samoiskorenenia, which means the Self-Eradication Department, or the Department of Self-Eradication, which is a very, very political band. The lyrics, one of the lyrics in the songs is Reagan and Andropov fucked all of Europe from behind, right? And so,
wow.
So the lyrics are very, very politicized, more than any other band in this Leningrad milieu of music. And this is in the early 80s. At the same time, some people might know of punk bands that emerge in Siberia. Grezdanskaya Oborona, for example, is one of them. Civil Defense from Omsk, Novosibirsk. There's this whole Siberian punk movement that is also starting, that is probably even more explosive than the Leningrad guys, in the sense that there's a whole diversity of bands. They develop their own network of shows and in movement, and they are spearheaded more or less by this individual, Yegor Letov, who is also very political, and he manages to kind of mass produce tapes of his band, Grezdanskaya Oborona. I don't know the exact number, but let's say that it's 100. And that's a lot for an individual to just keep copying, and he distributes them. And he comes under the radar of the KGB. And so the rumor is that he is on the run constantly, right? Because he doesn't want to get caught. That's the rumor anyway. But he's based in Siberia, so that's another kind of thing. So the rock club exists throughout the 80s. Eventually, Svin and Автоматический удовлетворительный, eventually they get access into the rock club. And as the Soviet Union inches closer to collapse, the membership, the restrictions of the rock club are loosened up, which is a kind of interesting phenomenon. So that's sort of the beginning of the process, the pro-generation, I guess, of punk in the Soviet Union.